Welcome, everybody, to On Texas Baseball. This is the premiere of Bases Loaded. I'm Blake Munroe, joined by Jeff Howe and CJ Vogel. Every Friday, we're going to be bringing you the latest Longhorn news and notes when it comes to baseball, along with a little discussion in between. And guys, let's back up, actually, almost a full week, as the alumni game last Saturday was very entertaining for fans. We had a packed house there, it looked like. Y'all's thoughts right off the top?
I think you got to start with Adrian Rodriguez. I mean, the kid goes yard again. That's what the big conversation that we had, the last video that we shot talking about Texas baseball. He had a double from the right side of the plate. He had a grand slam from the left side of the plate, and he follows that up against some minor league, major league guys that, come back to us, and he goes yard again from the left side of the plate, this time the opposite way. Look, we've obviously been mentioning him pretty often, and it's not uncommon to sit back and think, okay, Texas has had some really good freshman talent come through the 40 acres in all sports. And I'm sitting here thinking maybe Adrian Rodriguez is amongst the best that we've seen over the last 5 years, right? Madison Booker, All-American in women's basketball. We've already seen what a guy like Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill can do on the gridiron. But my goodness, it's hard to limit the expectations and excitement that I have right now for Adrian Rodriguez based off of really the first 2 weeks of the spring season for Texas baseball.
Yeah, a couple things for me. One was Dylan Volantis, and we've heard a lot about the freshman arms, and for Schloss to say that was his worst outing he's seen so far. He goes 3 innings, gives up no earned runs, strikes out a couple of big leaguers or pro players. I mean, he froze Zach Zubia on a pretty nasty off-speed pitch early in his outing. I thought Ruger Riojas was outstanding. Now he was getting big leaguers out. He retired Tres Barrera, retired Cody Clemens, retired Zubia, and then struck out David Hamilton during his outing. So I thought some of the arms were nice. And CJ, you mentioned Adrian Rodriguez, but I like some of the depth that's starting to form. I mean, I feel like we're starting to see. And look, it's a long season, and this could change, but I feel like at least going into it, we pretty much know what the starting lineup is going to look like. But between Cole Chamberlain, Casey Borba, Tommy Farmer, and Jaquay Stewart, I feel like those 4 guys are going to be your primary guys off the bench. And with Farmer, you've got a 4th outfielder. Jaquay Stewart can play first base or the corner outfield positions, and corner outfield would be in a pinch. Borba can play either one of the corner infield spots. Chamberlain can play first base or catcher, and all those guys can DH. They're all DH options depending on matchups and date and things like that. So that's where I am, Blake. I just starting to see some of the depth emerge because, look, it's a long year. Adrian Rodriguez is going to hit a wall at some point. Every good freshman does. We just don't know when it's going to be and how long it's going to last. And whenever he does, can a Cole Chamberlain or a Casey Borba be there to pick him up? If Easton Winfield adjusting from playing in the Sun Belt to playing in the SEC, if he has a struggle, could Tommy Farmer maybe step in during a weekend series and give you some quality at bats? So I like the way the depth is starting to shake out on this team, at least early.
Yeah, and one of the things that I enjoyed, granted I didn't get to see all of it, but I got to watch most of it, is I thought the pitching, I'm with you, Jeff, was a pleasant surprise. Aiden Moffitt was somebody that really impressed me because, we had heard leading up to this point, control is the issue. Control is the issue. He had control on Saturday. There's no doubt about it. So I was pleasantly surprised with pitching as a whole on the day.
I love my favorite quote of the weekend was Schloss saying, hey, because he got asked about, guys that throw hard. You need hard throwers in the SEC. And they said, hey, nobody cares how hard you throw a ball for. So that just drives home, reinforces how important control is to the staff, number one, and number two, kind of the basis of what Max Weiner's teaching his pitching staff right now.
Yeah, I guess for me, that's going to be really interesting to see how the pitching does move forward, right? We think it's going to be Luke Harrison. We think it's going to be Jared Spencer to start the weekend series. Who comes in to be that third guy? Who are some of the arms that Texas relies on for the midweek as well? How's a Grayson Saunier coming? How's Connor McCreary looking, right? These are all guys who've played SEC ball before. One name I'm interested to see how he kind of fits into this picture, as well as Derek Vartanen out of Campbell. This was a guy that was 250th overall pick in the 23 draft. He got hurt after just 3 games a year ago. can he be a guy that is relied upon as well? There's plenty of options that they got out of the portal. How do they mesh with guys that are returning, that are coming off of injury, a la Luke Harrison? So plenty of options. Who emerges is going to be really key. And Blake, I know you've talked about it previously, but as the spring ramps up and you start to see guys go from 2 or 3 innings at a time to 4 or 5, and then to hopefully what will be, a full 7 innings for most of these games early on, are you able to sustain your velo, your placement, your accuracy without getting worn down too early? I'm trusting Max Wiener, obviously, based off what he's done previously. I'm just eager to see how it all plays out with all these new arms who are basically brand new to the Texas program.
Well, I'm actually glad that you mentioned arms, because I do have a few notes. Last time we recorded video, guys, I talked about Jared Spencer, the left-handed pitcher out of Indiana State, the transfer, most likely being the Friday starter, Luke Harrison Saturday. So one of the questions I've been asked most since then is, what about the weekday? What about Sunday? And I have been told that they have narrowed it down. There's still not a penciled-in Sunday or Tuesday starter, whatever it may be. But that list is now just a handful of guys, like 5 or 6 guys that they are working to figure out who that is. Now, I did ask if Riojas was going to be in the mix for that, because, we've heard nothing but great returns. And again, kind of got the same answer on that. He will strictly stay at reliever and then be in that same role as Evan Aschenbeck out of A&M last season. So, don't look for him to start. But it sounds like they're really, just zoning in on a handful of dudes on the mound, but still going to have to wait to see who that is.
Yeah, the Sunday roll, Blake, and the midweek roll, I keep looking at the freshmen, and maybe not at the start, but what we saw from Dylan Volantis, the little we saw from Drew Rarick, Bryce Navarre is in that mix also. I like that Schloss ran a lot of guys out there, and Max Wiener ran a lot of guys out there in the alumni game. So at least it gave us a chance. I know the staff has seen it, but at least us in Gen Pop, you get to see a little bit about what Thomas Burns looks like, what Connor McCreary looks like. So you get to see some of these arms for the first time. I'll be honest, there were some things I saw, some adjustments Cody Howard's made that are encouraging. And he's a guy that's got bullpen experience. He's got starting experience. I'm not saying he's going to be a guy, but, hey, getting through I can't state it enough, getting through an SEC schedule, you need all hands on deck. And there's going to come a point probably where you're going to need a Cody Howard or somebody like that that's going to need to give you maybe 2 relief innings on a Sunday to get you a series win or to salvage a series and avoid getting swept, whatever it is. So, it's a long way to go with this pitching staff, but even the guys returning, Blake, I've liked what I've seen from them, some of the adjustments they've made.
Yeah, definitely a lot of optimism. And speaking of optimism, I was told that the staff also is very pleased with what they saw from the alumni game, that they have a lot of optimism on this season. And guys, that's a key word here. It's national. Let's look at the national polls here. Texas ranked as high as 7, as low as 19, but there seems to be a lot of national optimism around the Longhorns program as well. USA Today /coaches poll has them at 13, Baseball America at 14, Baseball Writers Association at 17, and then D1 Baseball, the lowest of the 5 major poll rankings, at number 19. But my question to y'all is, if you had a vote, where do you think Texas fits in?
I kind of lean towards that Baseball America poll, probably in that 14 to 17 range. Look, I think perfect game at 7. That's pretty generous in my eyes. There's just a lot of unknowns. And I know that you look at the pitching staff, we've just gone through it, who are going to be the arms that step up. A lot of teams that you're dealing with right now in the top 10, who their Sunday guys are. You know who's going to be trotting out there. You know who the arms are that you rely on in the back end. And Texas has a good idea. It's not a clear picture, obviously, but we've talked about it all the way through. This lineup, these options that they have at the plate, for me, that's going to be what keeps Texas competitive with just about every series that they face this season. Is that to say that 15 to 17 is too low? It could be in hindsight when we do a year-end review by the end of the season. But coming into this right now, I just want to see it first, right? Don't get over my skis. Don't get too ahead of what this team could be or is not because it's just an unknown. And I think right now the good basis is those guys returning, a Schlusler, a Flores, a Belu. I mean, you got some really talented bats at the plate. Gasparino, another I didn't even mention. How can they mesh with this new coming group? But I think at the end of the day, that lineup has just too much talent to be put away quietly in a lot of big SEC conference games this year.
Look, I consider Kendall Rogers a friend, and Aaron Fitton, the guys at D1 Baseball, do a great job. So I'm not going to disagree with them. I'd agree more with that 19, Blake. I think they're probably a 19, somewhere in the 20s, back end of a top 25. And I think that's a good place. I mean, look, it's Texas baseball, right? I think in a preseason poll, especially with as many positive changes as they've had in the offseason, I think you kind of have to put Texas somewhere in there. But, hey, I'm a big fan of, for unknown commodities, but that you're high on, that buy stock now while it's low. Hey, put them at the back end of the top 25 and see if they can rise, rather than, hey, let's just, like I said, I'm with CJ, kind of that number 7. That's a little bit a perfect game ranking. I wouldn't quite go that far, but I think this team's got a chance. The tough thing is, as they go through the SEC schedule, I wouldn't pay too much attention to ranking. I wouldn't even pay too much attention to conference standings, because, hey, one weekend you can be sitting pretty and right in the thick of the conference race, and then you face a tough opponent, get swept, and all of a sudden now it's like, oh my gosh, the world is ending. So it's a long haul. Blake, I know I keep repeating myself about it being a long season and the SEC being tough, but I'm just trying to prepare this fan base. I really hope people understand what you're about to get into, because what you've seen like in men's basketball this year, it's going to be that and then some for baseball. I mean, if you finish in the middle of the pack, if you finish 8th in the SEC, you're probably still a top 20 caliber team in the country. That's how good this league is. So I wouldn't get too up, too down. Just kind of take this ride with this team. This is going to be fun. I don't have a ton of grandiose expectations for this team. I'm just going to buckle my seatbelt, and I'm along for the ride. And I'm gonna see where this thing takes Texas.
And that's definitely fair. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. Of course, we're going to talk about the SEC as a whole here momentarily, but I think that the 7 ranking is way too optimistic, personally, from Perfect Game, and for a number of reasons. But I do feel like the Longhorns have done a great job of adding important pieces from the portal. Obviously, you got a great coaching staff in right now. So CJ, I'm kind of with you as well. 14-ish, which is actually the average of those 5 polls is exactly 14, but 14, 16, somewhere in there, I think is completely fair. I do not think top 10 though, just not yet anyway, by any means.
You know what? For me, Blake, regardless of ranking, I just want to see Texas get back to being able to win some big time games where you can rely on pitching and defense. I know, and it sounds like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth, because if you go back to some of what, I said probably at the end of Augie Garrido's tenure, like, dude, it's sad for like Nathan Thornhill or Dylan Peters that they can go out and give up a run or two and you got no chance to win the game because the other team has just shut down your bats. But man, especially some of the midweek games, like when you get into like a 14-8 game against, Sam Houston on a Tuesday, I'd rather that thing be like 5-0 and be over in 2.5 hours, and David Pierce did have some teams that were actually really good defensive teams. As a matter of fact, the 2022 team, as much as that pitching staff struggled, they had that was the best defense in the country. I mean, they had the best fielding percentage in college baseball that year. I think, guys being a year older, especially on the infield, when you look at Galvan and Flores, and you bring in Ethan Mendoza, who's got high-level Division I experience, and, Kimball Schuessler's played a lot of baseball, and we like Rodriguez. I think you've got a chance, and depending on how pitchers field their position, you've got a chance to have a really good defensive infield. So if Texas can rely on defense and not feel like beyond your Friday guy or maybe your top bullpen guy pitching is a liability, I think that's going to give you a chance to go compete every weekend. I think at this point, if you do that, I think you'll win enough to keep yourself in that top 20, top 25 mix the whole year.
That to me is going to be key. Is the back end of the rotation, the back end of the bullpen. If you get a 5-0 lead, Jeff, is that all you need, right? Is that the end of the game? And, there have been years under the David Pierce era where that was all you needed. And then there were other years where it's like, maybe you need 10, maybe you got to get close to 8, right? There's just too much fluctuation in the back end. And again, knowing what Max Wiener has done previously to what he will be working with, a guy like Jason Flores is really interesting in terms of how he can be tinkered and kind of tweaked with to become a back end guy. Maybe not necessarily a closer, but very similarly to that of a Ruger Riojas, that, hey, if they're in a jam, you can just throw out a guy's throwing 95 to 98 and get out of it, right? But of course, you got to have that command. And that was one of the issues that we saw for that media day, Jeff, was you get him on the mound, he allows a soft single, he walks a guy, he hits a guy, he's got bases loaded, nobody out. He strikes out 2, you got 2 outs, and then all of a sudden you get a big bad Adrian Rodriguez up there, and the rest is history. But the point is, if you can get ahead of guys, if you can, kind of alleviate the base on balls, the errant, pitches, because there was a pass ball in there as well, I need to add, if you can just refine it, you're going to have some guys that throw pretty hard, something that I don't think Texas has had a whole lot of in the back end of its bullpen lately, but more so guys that are throwing hard, that are throwing strikes. And when that's the case, you got a pretty good recipe for guys that can get guys out late in big game situations.
Yeah, you might have had, a Tanner Witt as a freshman that could run it up, but, Aaron Nixon wasn't a high velo guy that year. Cole Quintanilla wasn't a terribly high velo guy that year. But yeah, you've got, with Moffitt and Blake, speaking of velo guys, one guy I want to get your take on real quick when we talk about the back end of that bullpen, man, I don't know. I'm not counting on him. He's found money for me, and I don't know how much Max Wiener is counting on him. But, man, Will Mercer is a guy that they're intrigued by, and he may be the most intriguing guy on this team because talent's never been an issue with him. It's all about, can he be healthy? And kid's had a ton of arm issues. But, man, if he's healthy enough to give you an inning or 2 on a weekend, dude, he's got the kind of experience and the kind of tools that can make him a difference maker, even if it's, hey, maybe you just need him to come in and get 1 out for you in a big weekend series. But, man, I'm not saying Will Mercer's the X factor, but he's a wild card for me at this point. I'm really intrigued by Will Mercer.
Yeah, I am as well. And, I think as you said, a lot of experience. And obviously in baseball, that's going to be a great thing. For those that aren't aware, transferred from Notre Dame. Spent 4 years there, I believe, and then got hurt. So as Jeff said, he does have a ton of experience. I haven't heard a lot about him, but granted, I haven't specifically asked about him. So maybe next week I'll have an answer for what the expectations around the program are for him. But I'm with you. I mean, anytime that you can lean on a guy that's been through it, whether good or bad, as long as it's mostly good, obviously. That's a big plus to get you out of those sticky situations that, you just find yourself in sometimes in baseball.
Yeah. He straight Jesuit kid. So he's a Houston area kid, got to Notre Dame. He was class of 2018. So he's a true freshman at Notre Dame in 2019, redshirted that year. Then you had the COVID year. Then he pitched for a couple of years, actually pitched for 3 years. Schloss even said, hey, he was a guy that, A&M saw him in Omaha in 2022, but then got injured towards the back end of 23, came to Texas injured, was injured, I think it was a UCL, had to have Tommy John surgery before the 24 season, and that knocked him out for his 1 year at Texas. I assumed he was done, but he's got that COVID year. He's using it. So, hey, man, more power to him. Hopefully Will Mercer gets to go out on his terms.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you're watching Bases Loaded, brought to you by the good folks at Chinook Seedery. It's baseball season, so be sure to grab a bag of Chinook with 8 unique flavors to choose from. You'll find a flavor that you love, whether you're taking them to the ball game or just watching the game on your couch. Check them out at chinookseedery.com. And, guys, we will close with a couple of things here. First, the 2025 SEC Baseball Coaches Preseason Poll came out. This just, it blows my mind. Texas, as we saw in the polls earlier, anywhere as high as 7 all the way down to, 19. But they're picked 8th in the Coaches Preseason Poll, which just shows you how loaded the SEC is. It is worth noting, guys, that all of these top 10 teams here, for those that are listening, A&M, Tennessee, Alabama, LSU, Florida, Georgia, Vandy, Texas, Mississippi State, and Kentucky. All 10 of those are in every top 25 poll that there is. So, I mean, that it just means more, as it says on the graphic in the SEC. That is truly the case here. So my question to y'all, and we'll close with this. I mean, you look at this, you look at, Texas opening next Friday against Louisville there in Arlington at Globe Life Field. But Texas has an absolutely loaded schedule. I mean, there's no argument that could be made against that. You look at this graphic, the teams I just read you. What are your realistic expectations for the Longhorns during the 2025 season?
It's a heck of a question. Look, I think if you're able to host a regional at the end of the season, that's a good start, right? We just talked about it. There's 5 rankings that we went over. The average was 14. If you're in that area by the end of the season, that means you're basically what you were expected to be. And I think year one of a new coaching staff, a new program look, new expectations, that's a good sign. Now, of course, to get into that conversation with the Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas A&M, last year Georgia was there because they had a transcendent talent that was leading them into that charge. Could Texas get into that range? Sure, but it would take someone taking that leap. Could it be a Max Bailey? I mean, it certainly could. A guy who just had some really, impressive Big 12 numbers. Will that carry over? I think Texas will be just fine in the hitting department again, but you're going to need somebody that takes that step into an All-American level. I'm the best player in college baseball, a Hispanic Titanic era, Clemens era, something like that for me. We'll see. But I think right now, if you're able to host a regional or at least be in the conversation to be a team that potentially host even a super later on, that's a really good range if you're in that 10 to 12 to 14 range by the end of the season.
Yeah. I think if we're talking about this team being a top 4 team in the SEC by the time you get to April 25th, and April 25th is the first game of a 3-game series at home against Texas A&M, and you've got 3 weekends in a row. You're A&M at home, you're at Arkansas, Florida at home, and then you're going to finish the regular season in Norman against OU. So once you get into late April, you better have racked up your midweek wins, better have racked up those non-conference series wins, because you're going to have the RPI is it'll figure itself out because of how tough your conference schedule is. But where have you positioned yourself come April, come the start of that A&M series? Like I said, if you're in the top 3 or 4 of the conference, you're probably going to be pretty good as far as a regional goes, because as long as you don't get swept in any of those series, even if you don't win all those series, I think you're still going to be in a pretty good spot. But man, if you're hanging around 500 and you're going with A&M coming to town, then we're talking about a team that, hey, they're going to have to win a couple of these series to feel good about themselves going into the SEC tournament. So my expectation is that Texas is in that top 3 or 4 mix come the A&M series, and then that's going to be the litmus test for this team. Not saying anything against Georgia, Kentucky, Auburn, Mississippi State, LSU, the teams they play before that, but you get A&M at home, then you go to Arkansas, and then Florida comes in. That shows you how real it gets. You may have had 1 or 2 of those series in the Big 12. Now you got it 3 weekends in a row.
Yes. Season ticket holders should definitely be delighted this year, because it is a heck of a schedule.
Doing Schloss a solid not having to go to College Station this year.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm with you, CJ. I think you call this a success if you host a regional. Everything from there on out is gravy, but that, to me, that is it. And of course, we'll do a deeper dive into Texas schedule next week, but that's going to do it for this week here on Bases Loaded. Thank you all for tuning in. And for Jeff Howe and CJ Vogel, I'm Blake Munroe, and we'll see you next Friday.